Hello to the few of you that have joined us so far. We are just waiting a few minutes for a few more folks, and then we'll get started shortly. Good morning and good afternoon to those who have joined. We will give just another minute or two for a few more folks. Thank you for joining us, and then we'll get underway in a few minutes. Thank you. All right. Good morning and good afternoon. And I think we can go ahead and get started. And I'm sure we'll have some more of our members joining us, but we'll go ahead and get going. So just wanted to introduce myself real quick. I'm Julie Mitchell. I'm with the King County Hazardous Waste Management Program in King County, Washington, and also NAMA board member, and I'll be moderating our session today. And it's my pleasure to be able to moderate for my friend and colleague, Jordan Wells. We both serve together on the Advocacy Committee. So I am going to take just a quick time to shamelessly shill for our committee. So if you find some of this information useful that Jordan's going to be presenting, feel free to reach out to me or Jordan about interest in joining the advocacy committee. So with that, I'm going to let Jordan take over. So take it away, Jordan.
Thank you, and hi everyone. I'm sorry, there's going to be some background noise. I'm actually in an airport trying to get back to California, so please just excuse the background noise if there is any. But yeah, thank you so much, Julie. I'm Jordan Wells. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications at the National Stewardship Action Council. I'm really excited today to explain how a bill becomes a law and how you can get engaged in the legislative process. So next slide, please. And as always, we want to thank our sponsors who we wouldn't be here today without, including some of our higher level sponsors, including Texas for Clean Water, Stop Waste, Los Angeles Sanitation Department of Environment and Sanitation, West County Wastewater, and some of the other folks that you see listed here. Thank you so much. Next slide, please.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt, Jordan. I'm sorry, everyone. I forgot the one housekeeping item. that throughout Jordan's presentation, if you do have questions, if you could use the Q&A function and not the chat, that would be great. And so thank you, everybody, and sorry, Jordan.
No problem. And then on the next slide, we have our outstanding NSAC board of directors. We have 8 board members currently. We can have up to, I think, 13 or 14. So if you're interested, please reach out. And we're really proud that we have 5 women on the board and 2 board members that identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And then on the next slide, we also have our affiliated organization, which I will explain who the Stewardship Action Foundation is. But this is our outstanding again, board of directors, and we have 9 board members. Actually, I think we just added a few. So actually we have 10 board members, and I'm really excited to have a great representation from across the country. So again, if you're interested in participating further as a board member, please let me know, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that and explain what the roles and responsibilities are. Next slide, please. So the National Stewardship Action Council, we go by NSAC for short. We're a 501c4 nonprofit organization, which means that we can lobby unlimitedly at any level of government across the United States, as long as it aligns with our mission and vision. And then we also have an affiliated 501c3 nonprofit organization named the Stewardship Action Foundation, which primarily does education and outreach to support NSAC's advocacy work. But both organizations share a vision that the United States attains an equitable circular economy. Next slide, please. And NSAC was formed in 2015, and we actually didn't have full-time staff until 2019 because we were originally born as an affiliate of the California Product Stewardship Council, but now we are completely separate organizations with separate budgets and boards. But this is the track record of success that NSAC has had in the last 7 years, really, when we started sponsoring legislation in California and beyond. Many are first in the US, and even we have a first in the world bill. I realized I left 2 of the bills that are related to household hazardous waste unhighlighted, but I tried to identify just those that were targeting household HHW. And the 2 I left off were the marine flare extended producer responsibility that we sponsored this last year in California. Unfortunately, it was vetoed, and I can get into that if anyone has any questions. And then we also helped get rules out of the way to allow for household hazardous waste reuse programs and exchange programs in California. Next slide, please. And we really love to show this picture and ask folks, you know, when the bathtub is overflowing, what do you do first? You don't grab the mop. We have to turn off the faucet. And on the next slide, that really speaks to the first pillar of a circular economy by the definition that we go by, which is Ellen MacArthur's foundations. And that the first pillar is we have to design out waste and pollution. We need to turn off that faucet. Second, we need to keep our products and materials in use. On the next slide, sorry. And then lastly, we need to regenerate our natural systems that we've done so much damage to. So a great way of thinking about this is we need to decouple economic activity from the consumption of finite resources, because we do live on a planet with finite resources. And so sorry, Julie, would you mind going to the next slide? So yeah, those are the 3 pillars I just explained. And so going from our existing make, take waste linear economy to now a circular economy that follows those 3 pillars. So yeah, we can get into the legislative process now on the next slide. I don't know if you guys remember Schoolhouse Rock, but how a bill becomes a law. And on the next slide, this is just the general process. Of course, it can be different in different governments, but first you have to start with an idea. You know, there's a problem that needs to be addressed. There has to be, you know, a concept that a legislator can really create a bill around. And then next, you have to find somebody who's actually going to be the author of that and to champion that concept. Next, you want to, well, in finding the author, and then before you introduce the bill, you need to work with experts, speak with stakeholders, talk to impacted parties to help develop and craft the bill and write the bill and make sure that it aligns with existing law. And then you're ready to introduce it. In California, the process is the bill is read and then it's assigned to its respective committees that it's impacted. So whether it goes to the Environment Committee or the Toxics Committee, the bill will be referred to the appropriate committees, and then those committees will hold hearings, will they'll hear from stakeholders, and then ultimately decide the fate of the bill, whether it passes out of the committee, whether it needs amendments to improve the bill, or if they decide not to let it out at all. And then once it gets through the referred committees, it goes to a vote on the floor where all of the legislators for that house will vote on it. So once it gets through, let's say it's an assembly bill and it starts in the assembly, once it gets through the assembly, it then has to go through the same process in the other house, so the Senate. And once it's been voted on and passed by both bodies, if there was significant changes made in the second house, it actually has to go back, and it might have to go back to the committees if it was very substantial and they need to debate it, or it could just go back to the floor vote for what we call a concurrence vote, so that they can agree with the changes that were made in the other house since they voted on a different version of the bill. And then lastly, it goes to the governor's desk. In California, the governor typically has 30 days to either sign the bill into law, veto it, or let it become law without his or her signature. And there is a potential that if the governor does veto a bill, that the legislature can actually override the governor's veto. So in the next slide, this shows an example of a bill that we sponsored in California to expand our paint care program. We sponsored this in this year, and it was signed into law. Oh, sorry, this is an old slide, but it was signed into law in September by Governor Newsom. And as you can see, it was introduced in February. We have a 2-year legislative cycle in California. So this was actually the second year of a 2-year session. So it's an expedited timeline. It had to be signed by the end of August, the end of September. So the bill was introduced in February, just before the deadline for bills to be introduced. Normally, they can start being introduced in around January, and then they have to be introduced by a certain deadline, normally mid-February. And then it was referred to the Environmental Quality Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Appropriations Committee. So it was triple referred. And then it went to the Senate floor, the House of Origin, for a vote. And then, like I mentioned, it went to the other house, the Assembly, where it was referred to our Toxics Committee, then our Natural Resources Committee, and then again, the Fiscal Committee. And then it went to a vote on the floor. However, we did make changes in the Assembly. This bill actually started, which I'll explain in more detail in a minute, as a Household Hazardous Waste Extended Producer Responsibility Bill. And we did not have a path to passage. And so we decided to work with the American Coatings Association to expand the paint care law that we had in California. We've had in California for many years now. In the year prior, we had actually expanded it to include aerosol coatings. So the bill did pass with a concurrence vote after it was heard in the Environmental Quality Committee to look at those amendments, and it did go to the governor's desk and was signed into law.
And so, Jordan, we have a question kind of relating to the last 2 slides that you presented. And the question is, what qualifies as a significant change to a bill, and who decides what is significant?
I think there's a rules committee that would look at that and decide what referrals are needed. So they'll decide if they decided whether that needed to go back to the Environmental Quality Committee or if it could have just gone to the floor. So there's a body that looks at that and makes that determination based on the amendments that were taken. So for this one, we were switching it to creating a whole new program to expanding an existing program. So it really did warrant it going back for a concurrence vote and even being evaluated by the Environmental Quality Committee. And then on the next slide, I just wanted to, before I get to in the weeds about extended producer responsibility, I just wanted to share that there are numerous policy tools that can be used to advance the circular economy. That it does include sales bans. In California, we we phased out the sale of mercury-containing fluorescent lamps, because now that we have LEDs that are just as cost-effective, they are more sustainable, they last longer, and they produce the same amount of light, that we figured there was an alternative. So there's no need to continue selling toxic mercury lamps. Truth in labeling is another great policy tool, as well as right to repair, product stewardship, extended producer responsibility, where the producer is responsible for the end of life costs for what they put onto the marketplace. And then there's also deposits to increase collection, such as bottle bills or recycling refunds for beverage containers. Next slide, please. And just some of the benefits of producer responsibility is that when the producers have to be responsible for what they put on the marketplace at end of life, they're going to think about how they can make that end of life management as cost effective as possible. So often that results in them redesigning their product to be more durable, more reusable, repairable, and even less toxic. So it wouldn't be considered toxic at end of life. It also results in safer recycling systems. And again, it motivates them to keep those end of life costs down. And it also results in personal responsibility. So when those life cycle costs are embedded in the cost of the product, a consumer makes a choice on whether they're going to buy something that is less sustainable but costs more. If you don't have that market signal to the consumer, then they're buying something and they're not realizing what the end of life costs are, because those are being socialized onto all ratepayers. So in California alone, we have producer responsibility bills dating back to 2008 for agricultural pesticide containers. We have mercury thermostats, medications and needles, batteries, and unfortunately marine flares was vetoed. But we also have product stewardship programs for products like paint through paint care. So one of the strategies to advancing producer responsibility is getting it into the state's strategic directive. So in California, as an example, CalRecycle adopted this directive, and it said that they're going to seek statutory authority to foster cradle-to-cradle producer responsibility, and working with stakeholders to have producer finance and producer managed systems. So having the support of our agency has been extremely helpful in our efforts. So as I mentioned, these are the bills in California that we passed related to household hazardous waste, including the loose batteries, the extended producer responsibility. I mentioned truth in labeling. Before, they were able to put on the vaping devices, and you can't see it in this photo, but it said truly disposable. And so the consumer thought that, this implies that it can go into the trash. So we passed the truth in labeling bill so that they can no longer tell consumers that it's disposable and that they have to take it to a household hazardous waste facility. And next slide, please. So I just wanted to give some context of how we got to where we are today with all those bills that I just showed. So Alameda County passed the first EPR ordinance for medications in 2012, and they were actually sued by the pharmaceutical industry for violation of interstate commerce laws, in addition to a few other things. And the Alameda County actually won the court case, and the pharmaceutical industry petitioned it all the way up to the US Supreme Court, which denied to hear the case, which meant the lower court ruling stood. And that had a national impact. And it essentially said that EPR is allowed in the US so long as the product has a public health and safety nexus. So that was really exciting, and really grateful to Alameda County, who led the way for so much progress moving forward. Next slide, please. So what's critical for pursuing any type of legislation is having data to be able to tell that story. So an example of this is, what's really helpful is knowing contamination, knowing costs. In California, we found out that a recycler that was only taking curbside recyclables was still collecting 183,000 pounds of household hazardous waste, and it was costing them $150,000 for them to deal with that. This is actually part of their letter that they submitted in support of the household hazardous waste EPR bill that we were sponsoring. Another example is marine flares. In California, there's only one county that actually takes marine flares from their residents, but they actually don't even promote it because it's so costly. The reason that they are able to accept them is because they have what they call a magazine, which is the what is required to store them. And so even with Alameda, Zero Waste Sonoma can't accept them from the public, but they're still getting dropped off at their fire departments and their police stations and even at the HHW facility. And so even after partnering with, I think, 2 or 3 other jurisdictions in California to share the cost of transportation, 2 5-gallon buckets filled with flares cost over $11,000 for them to dispose of, which came out to about $185 a flare. And in a Los Angeles County, they held an event where it cost them $43 a flare. However, when you broke that down for the number of participants, it was almost $1,000 per person who attended the event and turned in flares. So, not just data, but studies. This came out of the University of Michigan, that environmental exposure to home chemicals, such as household hazardous waste in our garages, is tied to increased ALS risk. So having science and data to back up your concept or bill. Another important, in the last slide. Another important piece of this is that we have to educate our state and local elected officials. So oftentimes when we take legislators here we are at Shelley Fuller and Boulder County, when we take them to these facilities, you can just see their eyes and the light bulb goes off in their minds about, wow, I can't even believe this is, where our trash goes, and this is, the amount that is being produced by our residents. And it's really important for them to understand the nuances of your business and the challenges that you face day in and day out. So we do this through tours, which have been highly effective. And then also through our study trips. We have partnered with the California Foundation for the Environment and the Economy to host recycling challenge study trips. And we've gone to Canada, we've gone to New Mexico, we went to Shelley's facility in Colorado. And it's been an amazing way to not only have legislators talk to the implementers, the operators, but it also allows them to come back to their other colleagues in the legislature and really have this firsthand knowledge and to be able to share with them what they learned on their trip. I just to demonstrate how effective this has been, we had a bill in the Toxics Committee that one of the legislators that went on our study trips, she literally said, I feel comfortable moving this bill forward because I went on this trip and I understand this concept now. So it's a great education tool, and not only does it educate them, but it also provides them a resource. If they have a question about a bill coming down the pipeline and it's related to hazardous waste, they might call Shelley first to ask her, does this make sense? Will this solve your needs? And so it's a great way for establishing relationships and trust. And next slide, please. So another part, again, finding your author is you're finding your allies, your political champions. And that's in the legislature, but it's also other stakeholders. There's unique opportunities to find unlikely bedfellows. A great example of this is the vaping issue. You not only have the schools that are getting inundated with the students leaving vaping waste, but you have the public health entities. You have now wastewater groups being engaged in this because kids are going into the bathroom to vape, and then they don't want to get caught with it, and so they put it into the toilet and they flush it, and it's causing issues in the wastewater systems. So it's really great when you can find an issue that groups that don't normally come together on something that can coalesce and be able to, really advocate for a bill. It's really, really strong when you have that diverse group of stakeholders in support. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, SB 1143 by Senator Allen started out as a household hazardous waste extended producer responsibility bill. It was the Vermont passed HHW EPR in 2023, but this was actually the #1 recommendation from our California Recycling Commission that our Executive Director Heidi Sanborn chaired for 2 years. They came out with 34 policy recommendations, over 15 of which became law. But the very first one is that we need to stop the fires in the system, and we need to create an HHW framework for extended producer responsibility. So it was opposed by the American Chemistry Council, California Chamber of Commerce, and many other big and influential groups. Next slide, please. And here's that recommendation. What was really, really powerful also about the statewide commission on recycling markets and curbside recycling was the fact that you had 16 stakeholders representing unions, local governments, environmental NGOs like ours, and they had to have unanimous consensus. So what was really helpful is that they could go to the legislature and say, we already have all these different groups that support this concept, and it gives the legislator a lot more confidence going into what could be a really contentious battle. And so the proposal was that California needs to pass EPR framework legislation to establish and maintain a convenient and fully funded recovery system for all hazardous products, including residuals and their containers, as they are contaminants to other recycling and composting streams. Next slide. And sorry, I've been traveling for a week, so these slides are a little bit out of order, but I appreciate you hanging in there. All right, so as I mentioned, we didn't just have the 2 entities that were listed. We had the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, the Household and Commercial Products Association, even the Western Plant Health Association. We had a significant coalition against us. And then on the next slide, we have how you can be prepared to really mobilize your networks. And so, writing op-eds and articles to attract attention to the issue is a great way to make noise. And then also making it as easy as possible for folks to get engaged. So as part of the process, you create a fact sheet just so folks can easily digest what the bill does. But we often also create a fact versus fiction. So we take the arguments that the opposition is using, and then we give a rebuttal to them and explain why that's not really factual or that doesn't really make sense. We also often, part of passing a bill is in negotiation and working with the opposition. The first thing a legislator asks when you bring them an idea is, who's going to be against this? And you really do have to have a conversation with the opposition to understand their pain points as well. So when we do take the amendments to ease their concerns, we like to identify that to show that we're making compromises through this process. Giving folks detailed instructions. This is how you call your legislator. This is how you can weigh in and tell them you support this. We provide sample emails. We give them call scripts and talking points. And most importantly, we also provide model letters and coalition letters. It's really difficult sometimes for folks to engage in the process. You saw how many different committees it goes through. Each time the bill is amended or referred to a new committee, you have to update your letter. And that can be really onerous for folks that aren't doing this day in and day out. So creating a coalition letter where folks can sign on and then we're responsible for that makes it a lot easier for everybody else. And then we send out an email and essentially says, this is how the bill changed. If you still want to remain on, we're going to keep you on. And if not, we're going to remove you if you no longer want to support the bill for whatever reason. Creating a buzz on social media is also a way to grab attention. And then we create social media toolkits where we create graphics and propose text. So it's really easy for other organizations to post it on their social media channels. And then also, again, how not only, what you should say to your legislator when you get in touch with them, but how do you even find out if you don't even know who your legislator is, or how to contact them. So next slide, please. And when you're going, especially if you're a sponsor of a bill, you really want that legislator to have one deck, essentially. You really want them to have as much support as possible. I remember this was the bill that unfortunately was vetoed, but it was the first in the world, marine flare extended producer responsibility. And I remember the author kindly was just thanked us profusely for having so many people lined up to testify in support of the bill. So we had 66 entities in support, and that takes not just emailing a listserv, but making individual calls to follow up and garner their support. So building a coalition of stakeholders that support your bill is critical for getting it through the process. And you want to have, again, diverse representation. We had the California firefighters, we had cities and counties, we had waste facilities. So we really were able to provide our legislator a lot of cover when going into a fight. And it was a fight. Another way on the next slide to be able to try and get something through is to create a package. So a couple of years ago, California, we helped spearhead a circular economy package that was really great because the governor could sign, I think it started off with 13, but 10 of the 13 bills actually did get signed into law. And so it's a great press opportunity, but also a way to, build allies amongst the sponsors of the different legislation that might be, not normally advocating for the same concept. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, we hit roadblocks on the state level. So California, as I mentioned, was the first to pass EPR for medications and needles, but it didn't happen overnight. So there were actually two bills that failed in the legislature in 2013 and 2014. That's actually Heidi Sanborn, our executive director, and on the left of her, I guess her right, is Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, who was the author of all three bills. But after the second bill failed in 2014, she actually sent a letter to local government saying, we need you to act on the local level because we're not getting this through on the state level. So on the next slide, you can see that 13 cities and counties stepped up and did just that. Obviously, Alameda County went first, but once that letter went out in 2014, you can see City and County of San Francisco, 2015. I mean, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Marin, Santa Cruz, those all happened in 2015. So really, that's what we're talking to folks now about is, we ran into some issues with the household hazardous waste EPR bill at the state level. And so we really need to put pressure from the local level. And it got us one of the best bills that we've passed in California through this approach. And next slide. I'm a Friends fan. So of course, as I mentioned, this bill started off, SB 1143 started off as household hazardous waste EPR, but you need to know when to pivot if something's not going to go through as you had hoped and anticipated. And that leads me to the next slide, where we did amend the bill in June. We first amended it to add the paint care expansion, and then in August, we removed the household hazardous waste EPR. We were getting towards the end of the process. And so that's when it was narrowed just to be the Paint Care Expansion Act. Senator Allen is very dedicated to this issue, and he is already talking with stakeholders, and we are looking to help him by sponsoring a bill to be introduced in 2025. I have been talking to several other states that are also looking to introduce HHW EPR, two of which already have a bill drafted. And we are hosting, I don't know if I put a slide on this, we're hosting a working group for folks across the country to be able to share information, discuss strategy, and most recently on our first call, we had Josh from Vermont, who gave a great explanation of their process, the pain points that they hit when they were trying to pass the legislation. So it's a great way to share information and to work together. Next slide. So yeah, this is what ultimately came out of the bill. Essentially, it expanded the program to be all non-industrial paint and specified paint products. And it's really, a model for states moving forward that are interested in passing a paint recycling stewardship bill, is to include all these aerosols and all the paints and the paint products at the very beginning, rather than having to add it in like we did. And that's always, I'm so sorry. That's always, we're always constantly learning from other states, from each other, ways to improve, and we love to share those lessons so that folks don't have to have the same growing pains that we did in California. So we do have an advocacy committee, and it meets on the second Thursday of each month at 8 a.m. And we've already done some great work on developing fact sheets for policy for marine flares, for pressurized containers. And in the past, they had put out a paint policy statement and legislation principles. The NAMA has engaged in several bills, and we as NSAC have provided an opportunity for NAMA to weigh in on legislation, and they have. And so we'll greatly appreciate all of my colleagues on the advocacy committee, but really encourage other folks to participate. We would really value some more NAMA members being engaged in the advocacy committee. On the next slide, we have our priorities for 2025 and beyond. So addressing the vetoes that took place this year that included the marine flare EPR bill, and then Senator Allen also authored an electric vehicle battery bill that also was vetoed. And so those will both need to be worked on next year, and so we can get them signed into law. We're also working on the WIPES Act. This is not as related to hazardous waste, but it's again, truth in labeling. They were calling non-flushable wipes flushable. So in California, we followed actually Washington State, and we passed the second truth in labeling bill for wipes. And that has been introduced. It's a bicameral, bipartisan bill that's gotten pretty far in Congress. And we're hoping that we can get that passed, and that's working with the industry. Then we're also going to, again, like I mentioned, we're not letting go of household hazardous waste EPR, and we're going to be working hard to get that done in California next year. Recycling refunds, also known as bottle bills, only 10 states have recycling refunds, but they actually reduce litter by 50%. And so we'd like to see more states, ideally a national bottle bill, but at least more states adopting recycling refunds. And then working on critical earth minerals that are in products such as solar panels and e-waste, and ensuring that we are recycling those domestically and keeping a domestic supply of our critical earth minerals for the next generation of products. And ultimately, our hope is that we can really get more, so even on the front end of the system, and that things won't be able to be put onto the marketplace that have no end of life plan. That's our end goal. So, we hope that nothing can, like I mentioned, go into the marketplace without an end of life management program in place. And with that, I know we're leaving 20 minutes for Q&A, but happy to clarify or answer any questions.
All right. Thanks, Jordan. And for folks who do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. And that was an amazing amount of information. So thank you. Thank you very much. I do have a question while we wait if any of our other folks have a question. So as you were going through that, it looks like there's a lot around trying to advocate, at least through your either state or local government. So, so you mentioned, so what are some of the things, so for some of our members that are actually at, let's say, the facility level, where they see like a lot of this stuff and like they have some ideas, what are some of the things that our members more at the ground level, what are some of the things that they could do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think finding I mean, of course, NAMA is an amazing resource, and groups like NSAC that can really help you figure out, what path to take and to communicate with legislators. And I think also, as I mentioned, I'm really trying to get folks to start having tours of their facilities, and so that you can start that dialogue through that way. Even having their legislative staff is extremely helpful. Um, so yeah, there's whether you have a stewardship council in your state or not, NSAC is always here, and we can help find partners on the ground. We have connections all over the country, and so of course I'm going to suggest that you reach out to NSAC, but also start with tours of your facility and establishing a relationship with your local or state elected officials.
That's super helpful. Yeah, because I think sometimes our folks that are a little bit more on the ground level are some of this sounds a little pie in the sky. So it's wonderful to know what we could all do with our part to help with some of the circular economy and the EPR efforts. So
Yeah, and
that's
sharing your data, especially too, if you have high contamination, documenting that and sharing that with them when you do communicate with them so they understand what the gravity of the situation is.
Yeah, so in Washington State, we're currently going through some of those processes. So besides, kind of working at a little bit higher admin level for my job, I also track data. And so for our battery rulemaking is what we're doing. So we passed a battery stewardship bill, but now we're going into the rulemaking process, and we are getting a lot of data requests. And so we track a lot of that data through a database that we have built. And so we are now able to give some of that information, but not just to King County, throughout the state. So that's what our local facilities are being asked for, is the data. So that's another great point for what we can do, maybe at a little bit more of a ground level to help support these efforts.
And you can also use that data to, craft your story and, maybe put out an op-ed or, a letter to the journal or something similar.
Excellent. Well, seeing no questions, I think Jordan is okay, yep. We got some thanks. So yeah, so I think then that will, oh, hold on one second. Yep. And then yeah, Jordan put some information in the chat. So with that, I would like to thank all of our attendees, and reach out to Jordan or myself if you're interested in the advocacy committee, and reach out to Jordan if there are other questions that you find in the future where it's like, yeah, what is it that we can do again to help support the EPR efforts? So. I think with that, I'd like to wish you all a good day, and we will see you on the next webinar. All right. Thanks again, Jordan. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you for bearing with me with the background noise and the distractions. I apologize.